Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Like Me Stories in Business. I have a really interesting lady here today. She has got quite the story to tell. So hang in there. You're going to want to hear it for sure. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today and about who Jane is. So today's guest has a story about ambition, responsibility, survival, and the courage it takes to look back at the woman you once were with compassion and honesty. Jane Byers is an award-winning author, facilitator, and a former managing director and senior banker with JPMorgan Chase. Jane was a young mother building a demanding banking career when she survived the September 11th attacks in downtown Manhattan. I watched from a television, so I just can't even imagine. Jane's story is about much more than Wall Street. It's about the contradictions we carry, the choices we make, and the moment we become willing to take responsibility for the life we are creating. It took Jane 15 years to finish her memoir and find the courage to share it. Today, she helps others reconnect with what matters most to them, their personal ideas, natural gifts, and the inner values that can guide them through uncertainty and change. So, welcome, Jane. I'm just so honored to have you here today. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Julie. It's really great to be here and to meet you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Jane, before you entered the world of Wall Street, who were you as that young woman, and what did you imagine your life would become?
Sure. I was actually a social worker before I became a banker. So
Oh,
yeah, I went to a women's college in Boston, Simmons University, and I majored in human services and women's studies. And I was going to be a social worker who was going to make the world a better place. And I went into foster care. So I was a foster care
oh,
social worker making a very small amount of money
mhm.
and doing an awful lot of paperwork for something that was supposed to be, helping people. And I had gotten married very early in college, and my husband was a musician, and he had a penchant for gambling. So we had, between my low salary and his, music business, etc., we had kind of an inconsistent financial basis. And so that was very uncomfortable for me. And I
Yeah.
had been raised, I really was raised as a child of privilege. And so I think my parents just assumed that my husband would take care of me. And I was too much of a feminist to really want that. But I also didn't give a lot of thought as to how I was going to earn money. So, actually, my father recommended that I go into banking. He said it was very hospitable to women. Now, this was, the early 80s. So,
Yeah.
and he said, they have a training program and you'll learn a lot of things. And so I took an entry level job and eventually got myself into the credit training program and became a loan officer and was actually assigned to the electric utilities industry in the southeast of the United States, which I found to be quite boring. So when a friend said they had an opening in the Wall Street Group, I said, "Great. What happens in the Wall Street Group? What is that?" I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
no idea. But that's how I started. And I did not expect to be, have a career in banking, but I
Yeah.
just followed it, and that's what happened.
Isn't it funny how things just what's meant to be just kind of lands on our laps, and then we
Hmm.
have to have the responsibility to take the action. But that very interesting. Well, were there moments where you felt you had to become tougher, quieter, different from your natural self to be taken seriously?
Well, as I said, I didn't expect to be a banker. And because I was married to someone who had a passion for music, I kept thinking like I should have a passion. Like how do I get a passion? I don't have a
Yeah,
passion. And
yeah.
so, but on the other hand, I was very good at what I was doing. I had sort of a natural ability to learn about being a lender, and part of my job was relationship management. And so, as my social work skills, it was very easy to work
Yeah.
with people, but I felt compartmentalized, I guess.
Mhm.
And definitely wanted to be taken seriously as a woman, and or as a person, sort of despite being a woman in that environment. So, maybe I, kept my spiritual life over here and my emotional life over here and my pragmatic self, in the office.
Yeah. And I guess that's really sometimes how we have to deal with it, depending on the careers that we choose, for sure.
hmm
Yeah.
hmm
So, what pressures did you experience as a mother pursuing a demanding senior career?
Yeah. So, was, I got pregnant with my first child in uh, my first child was born in 1991. And my boss I said, I don't think I can work full time. So he got me approval to work 4 days a week, which was kind of cutting edge in those days. And so I really appreciated that. And I did that for 10 years. And I often felt trapped by that to a certain extent
Mhm.
because where was I going to go? It was a great setup. And so even though I was maybe like a little bored and uninspired by my job, I had this great, I called them my golden handcuffs. And because I was in sort of a revenue producing job, even though I went to 4 days a week, I kept making a lot of money because I was successful in my job.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't until 9/11, and uh, I had to we had to step up in the wake of that to continue make sure that the financial system did not collapse. And so that gave me a renewed appreciation for the importance of my job.
Mhm.
And it also gave me an entree into becoming the head of the department, because a year after 9/11, my boss called it quits. And so there was an opening. And so then I was able to step up, and I had to give up my 4 days a week to do that. I had to
Yes.
go full time.
Yeah.
And by then my kids were school age, and I felt, I pretty much left the office by 7. I tried not to travel too much. Most of my clients were in New York, so I didn't have that crazy travel schedule that some people
Yeah.
do have. So I always made it a point to be home for dinner, to put my kids to bed, to read them a story, to be, help them with their homework, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you were working downtown Manhattan on
hmm
September 11th.
hmm
So what could you share with us about that?
Yeah, so I worked in the Chase Manhattan building on the 21st floor, which was about 4 blocks to the east of the Trade Center. And I was in the office early, and I was on the phone with my sister, and I heard a loud bang and the building shook. I was like, that is not right. So I hung up with her, and I went to see my boss, and he said, the news was reporting that a commuter plane had flown into the Trade Center. So I walked down the hall to, so I could see the windows that looked west, and I couldn't see the Trade Center because there was a building in my way, but I could see lots of debris in the air. And I thought, maybe there was a bomb, because there had been a bombing at the Trade Center in 1993, but I really wasn't sure. And
Yeah.
so I came back down the hall, and some of our colleagues who commuted through the Trade Center came in, and they said, no, we saw it hit. That was a jetliner. So we were trying to wrap our heads around that. And then the second plane hit. And so our department head came down. He said, that's not an accident. You better get out of the building. But the loudspeaker was saying, we're not evacuating the building. So we had sort of contradictory advice about what to do. And I happened to be claustrophobic, and there was no way I was getting in a crowded elevator to get out of the building. So I waited. Um, and then I did go down, and when I went down, I could look and see the trade center, and I could see the second building on fire. And the strangest thing was there were papers at my feet, and I looked down and I could see that they were like bank statements for my clients that were in the trade center. So that paperwork was all the way over where we
Wow.
were.
Wow.
And then a colleague who had been at a meeting came back and she needed to use the restroom. So she's like, "Can we go in the building?" I said, "Actually, we can. They're not evacuating it." So we went back upstairs and we were, fortunately for us, we were inside when the towers fell. So I mean, it was incredibly frightening, but I have friends and colleagues who were outside when the building fell, and it was horrendous. It was very difficult for them.
Wow.
And we were evacuated probably around 12 o'clock, midday. But because our job was lending money and moving cash and securities for broker dealers, we had many of whom were in the trade center. We were having a lot of telephone calls and crises, and both people looking for other people, but also looking for money, and how are we gonna operate? What are we gonna do? And so after we were evacuated, we walked uptown, and I stopped at Credit Suisse First Boston, one of my clients, and talked my way into the building. Of course, they didn't want to let anybody in who didn't work there, but I found somebody that knew me and we got in there. So I could make some phone calls and I could kind of figure out what was happening, and then check in at home, make sure the kids were okay. And then I walked up to 270 Park Avenue, the world headquarters where my department head was and where, all the senior management of the bank was. And they were telling us, you got to keep doing what you're doing because we cannot allow the financial system to collapse. And so that meant that cash and securities needed to keep moving, even though significant number of market participants were out of commission.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
it was
How
crazy.
did you how did you carry that emotional weight of
Mm,
decisions
mm,
that because you're dealing with people, I mean, it was horrible what happened, but life has to go on, right?
yeah.
You can't let it collapse. And how was that for you emotionally?
Yeah, it was very overwhelming. I mean, I think I was dissociating for a certain period of time. I am happened to be very good in a crisis, and so
Mm,
I very reactive, and so I'm able to make phone calls and make decisions and do things, and then go home and collapse. And one of the things that I did to protect myself was I did not look at the television. Okay, so everybody else is looking at. I did
yes.
not look at the television until the weekend, and then I was like, oh, I just can't. And there was so much hatred and anger and rabble rousing. And I was just like, I'm just in mourning and
Yeah.
uh, crying, every day, crying every days. And then, after then you went through this period where everybody's rushing to, help the survivors. And there's like, there are no survivors. There's no bodies. There's nothing. There's just, this mess. And then we started with the funerals and the bagpipes and it was and then also in the New York financial services industry, a lot of people also come from families of first responders, policemen and firemen. So there was a disproportionate amount of loss in the financial community, one because of where the attacks took place, but then also because of the first responders being part of that network as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a horrendous thing for people to have to go through and live through. Just
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, let's shift a little bit. And thank you for that. I appreciate that. Let's shift a bit. So you said that you were willing to change your thoughts in order
Hmm.
to change your life. So what thoughts did you have challenge with? What did you need to change?
Yeah. I had a lot of negative self-talk.
Mhm.
I had uh, a strong judgment voice, which comes right along hand with the perfectionist voice. And, fits in nicely with guilt and shame
Yeah,
and, toss in a little bit of denial. And you got a nice recipe for not really coping with what's right in front of your face. And
yeah,
so, the multiple crises that I faced at work during the time period in the 2000s, and also the my father's dementia and death, my mother's cancer and death, my husband's gambling, the demise of my marriage, all of that sort of brought me to rock bottom. And even though I had been in a 12-step program, I had to really reinvent myself at when my career ended and my marriage ended. Yeah.
yeah. Wow. So, what's the difference between blaming ourselves and taking healthy responsibility for our
Mm,
choices?
yeah, that's a good question. I think it's really important to be self-accountable.
Mhm.
Blame is more in the uh, in the guilt and shame category, where it tends to be corrosive and uh, paralyzing, whereas self-accountability is more empowering and puts the focus back on our ability to reclaim our power and reclaim our agency.
Yeah, I come from not the greatest background in my childhood, but there was so much blame. And it was never anybody's fault in the house. It was, lack of money. Well, it's the government's fault and it's this
Mm,
person's fault. And I've got brothers who followed in those footsteps. And they're not healthy and they're not doing well in the world. And so, even if it is somebody else's fault,
mhm.
it doesn't do us any good to wallow in it. I agree with you. I think it's just so empowering just to take responsibility for myself, where I am, and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, I think that's part of becoming an adult, and it doesn't happen at 18. It
No,
happens whenever you decide that you want to be an adult, but
that's true.
could be 50, like for some of us.
It could be. Yeah,
But
yeah,
you really eventually it doesn't matter. My parents did this, my spouse did that, my
yeah,
siblings did this, my boss did that. Eventually you realize that it all starts within, and that if we project all of that outward onto other people, we will never be able to reclaim our lives in the way that we can.
yeah, yeah. That's such a good point. So, was there a version of success you had to release before you could discover what a satisfying life meant to you?
There's When I decided to retire in 2010, 2 years after the financial crisis, I was totally burnt out. So I was really ready. And, you go from 150 emails a day, everybody has to talk to you, your calendar is packed, to, none. Nobody.
Yes.
Yeah. And while
Oh,
it's liberating from a exhaustion point of view, the ego suffers. And the ego, so the ego says, well, oh, maybe I should listen to that job offer with the money and the title and the this and the that, even full well knowing I didn't want those things. I didn't want that life, but it took me a while to wean my ego off of that and to say, I want something different, and I don't know what it is. So it's really scary because you're walking into the unknown, and you
yeah,
have to have a certain amount of faith that something there awaits that's better than what I'm turning my back on.
yeah. I thank you for saying that about the ego because I think so many of us get caught up in that. I was in a career in sales and marketing for 34 years and I retired officially from that to do this full time. And but it was hard. And even now, I was with somebody and they were looking for a professional. They needed help. And in my brain, I'm like, well, I could do that. And then I had to rein myself in. And it is the ego. You're 100% right on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that ego's dangerous.
It has its place because
Yes.
I think I had a somewhat narcissistic father, a somewhat narcissistic husband, and I did not have healthy ego development. I think I had an overdeveloped id, or I might not have my my terminology all correct, but I had a
Yeah.
good, these are the rules and you better follow the rules voice. But not so much like, hey, this is me and I'm gonna do my thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like
Yeah.
I had to find my way back to my 5-year-old self, who she had it going on, that 5-year-old,
Yeah.
before we get all our conditioning.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your book, Writing Eight Septembers.
So I did not want to write my story. I did not want to tell my story. I was very burnt out and traumatized by my story, and I was trying to get away from it as fast as I could. So, but I had a friend who was an author and a historian, and the late Christopher P. Moore, and he kept telling me I had a story. And he's the one that said, you were downtown on 9/11, and then in 2008, on that same day, 9/11, you made the final margin call on Lehman Brothers before they filed for bankruptcy. And there's a story in there.
Yes,
And
of
I said, Chris,
course.
no. I don't wanna. And
Yeah.
but then he interviewed me for a play that he was writing about 9/11. And when I came home, we talked for like maybe 3 hours. And when I came home, I just started writing. And I said, I have all this toxicity inside of me and I got to get it out. But I didn't know if I knew I didn't want to write a business book. I knew I didn't want to write a business book. It was too much.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know if I could write about my life. And I tried to write about my professional life without writing about my personal life, and that was a no-go.
Yeah.
But when I started, I know you're a writer and you help people write, so you'll appreciate this story. So I went to Gotham Writers in New York, and I was newly single, and they had this Friday night drop-in program where you go, you pay $20, they give you a prompt, everybody writes for 15 minutes, and then you can share what you wrote if you wanted. And it's
Yeah.
Friday night, so you only get positive feedback.
Yes.
So I said, all right, well, whatever the prompt is, I'm going to write something true about my life to see if I'm actually capable of writing about my life. And what I found was, even though I did that, I always wrote in the third person and I always referred to myself as she. So it's kind of
Mhm.
shocking to me that I have this first person, very personal narrative that's out there. And that was,
Yes.
part of why it took 15 years to do it, because there were a couple of things that were very difficult. And one was just remembering. It was such a swirl of chaotic events. And so emotionally, and starting, so there's a certain amount of PTSD just from the 9/11 events, and then all these other things happened, both, professional crises with clients going bankrupt and et cetera, markets being disrupted. And then, as I mentioned, the issues with my parents and my marriage. And so just remembering and putting things in the right sequence was difficult. The second thing that was really hard was gathering the courage to be honest and to really to tell the emotional truth. And so it's been very gratifying to me that readers have really, really responded to that and called that out as like the main thing that they like about the book, because it was hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it took a lot of therapy and a lot of personal development workshops and a lot of writing workshops, to kind of get there, and a lot of professional editing as well. Um, And then the third thing was since I wasn't writing a business book and I knew I was writing for a general audience, I said, okay, I know my readers will be smart and educated, but they don't know anything about this little esoteric part of the world where I work. How
Yeah.
am I going to find the language that makes these financial concepts accessible to them so that they can understand the stakes involved in the story that I'm telling? So, I've also been gratified that readers have said I have hit the mark on that. And at the same time, I had to be like, well, but it still has to be credible to my colleagues in the industry because they're going to read the book too. So I
Yes, that's
can't
right.
I can't change it so much that it no longer is close to reality. So it was a balancing act.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, why did you decide that you needed to write a book? Was it just
Mm.
basically for inside healing to get it out? What was your reason for deciding?
Yeah, initially it was just to make sense of it in my
Mm.
own head, to understand what happened, to remember, to see what was of value. So it was originally for for self-understanding, I would say. Like
Yeah.
like a lot of memoir, I think, is people are
Yes.
trying to make sense of things. And uh then I got to the point where I could appreciate what my friend Chris was saying, which was that I had a unique vantage point to these really global historic events because of the position that I had at the bank. And then because there weren't that many women in that position and there weren't that many mothers in that position, I was like, I have a unique perspective, and
Mhm.
I think it might add something to the narrative. So I'd like to make a distinction between writing and publishing
Yes.
because, because you get all to the writing and then it's like, well, am I going to publish? Well, why am I going to publish? And who am I writing for? Who am I publishing for? And so that last leg in the journey of deciding to go public, of deciding to share it and be vulnerable, was a big step. It was a big step.
So when you first started writing it, you weren't really in the thought process that you were going to eventually publish it.
No,
Interesting. Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
I
Well, were
didn't I didn't even want to know what it was about, let
there,
alone let other people
yeah.
know. Because
Well,
again, those voices of guilt
yes.
and shame were really,
Yes.
really strong. And
Yeah.
so I had to do my own inner work so that I could gain the capacity to tell my story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, were there parts of the book that became difficult to write because they required you to see yourself differently?
Uh, they I was stuck in the murky middle for a long time. I said,
Mm,
okay, I have, 9/11 is a big event. The
yeah.
Lehman financial crisis is a big event. So I sort of had my, barbells at the end. Um, and then I had this swirl in the middle and a lot of emotion, a lot of anger and confusion. And so I had to step back and look at not just myself differently, but all the characters in my book, and particularly the more challenging characters. And so, one of the really impactful exercises that I did was I would write some scenes from their point of view, from the challenging person's point of view, so that I could have a little bit more empathy and create a little bit more compassion and create more round characters. When you study and for fiction and they tell you,
Yes.
there's flat characters, round characters, you want round characters, and that means, I gave this one submission to one of the critique groups I was in, and they're like, okay, Jane, we know you hate her. Now you need to make us hate her.
Hater.
So in other words, I can't tell you. I have to, describe the scenes and the stories
Take you
and the
through it.
situation. And
Yeah.
but in doing that, I realized, we never have the whole story about
Mm,
ourselves or about other people. And so even though in the book, I might have strong or hard opinions about people, I don't still carry that because I really did gain compassion and perspective for the different people in my book through the process of writing.
Yeah. So, but your manuscript won the Florida Writers Association's Gold Royal Palm Literary Award in 2023. That's exciting.
Yes, that was very encouraging. That was for unpublished memoir. And
Oh,
yeah, so that was before I'd actually had any real professional editing. And it was very, very encouraging. And it came along with a lot of very practical feedback, which I find feedback and critique to be very motivating.
yes.
So, for instance, it's called Eight Septembers, but you wrote it in six parts. Wouldn't it be more logical to put it in eight parts? So, yeah, so I have it
It's
in
like,
eight
oh,
parts.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, right. I have it in eight parts, and there's an introduction and an epilogue, and blah blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was just really really encouraging because I think it was the first time that I sent it off to somebody who didn't know me. I wasn't in a class with. They looked at the whole thing. But I've had three manuscript reviews. I had four rounds of professional editing, two with one company and two with another company. And what I learned was, the difference between the reason why self-publishing has a bad reputation is because people don't invest in the editing like they do with a
Yes.
traditionally published book.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I took that to heart. And by the time it got to my current publisher and editor, it was in very good shape. And so that editor, who was fantastic, Corey Stewart, she really elevated the book to a whole nother level, which I was like, people might not like my book, but they better say it's well written.
Yeah.
What's my I'm like, you don't have to love what I have to say, but it's well written. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah. So, what would you say to a woman who has been writing or avoiding the same book for years?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I do have some people in my current group that are sort of in that situation, and I tell them to just write for themselves. I say, turn
Mm.
off your editor. Don't worry about your kids or your parents or who's going to read it. Just write it for yourself first and give yourself permission that, it doesn't have to go anywhere, but be brave enough to tell yourself the truth.
Mm. That's great advice. So, in your work as a facilitator, you help people discover their personal idea or ideal. So, what does
Ideals.
that mean?
Yeah. So you can think of an ideal as the motivating forces in your life, like what inspires you, or what is the spirit with which you do the work that you do, right? So you can be, a really angry social worker and a really loving banker, I
Yeah.
mean, right? So what
Yes.
energy are you bringing? What energy are you manifesting in your relationships and in your work? And so through a series of experiential exercises and mindfulness and guided meditations, I help people uh, generate we call them the facets of their ideal, but in other words, to find out what's core. So right, you can take a strengths finders test, you can take a Myers-Briggs, and you can find out what somebody else think, which buckets they think you're in.
Right.
But in these kind of self-reflective experiential exercises, you find out what's innately within you. And so you those things come to the surface and you're like, well, I'm actually, collaboration is really important to me, or communication is really important to me, or creativity, or I don't know why I'm choosing all C words, but all those things. And
Yes.
so then we work with, well, what is that energy? What does collaboration mean? What is that? How does that show up when you're fighting with your teenage daughter? What does collaboration mean? What does collaboration have to say to help you navigate that moment? So it's both. an ideal is both aspirational and also super pragmatic in terms of how am I going to apply this in this moment.
Mhm. How can a woman how can a woman recognize her own natural gifts after years of measuring herself through performance and productivity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, it was only being able to go within and
Mm.
to have these um to to be willing to let that go. So one of the things, and what I teach, I was a student of for many, many years. And, one of the things I had to do was put my internal validation in right relationship with my external validation because we need both. But I had given everything over to external validation and I didn't
Ah,
have the internal. If you only have
yeah,
internal valuation, then you're, an egotistical narcissistic maniac. But
right.
if you only have external
Yeah.
validation, then you've completely given your power away for any
Mm.
enjoyment or efficacy in your life. And so putting those two things in right relationship was important for me. And sometimes just being aware of something without judging it allows us to loosen our grip on it. So just even recognizing, oh, I'm dependent on external validation. Now, the first reaction is, well, now let me scold myself about that because
Right.
that's a dumb thing and I shouldn't do that and blah 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 blah. But
Yes.
if I can put that voice to the side and just without judgment and with compassion just say, "Oh, I am overly reliant on external validation," then I can say, let me take a breath. All right, what
Yeah.
do I need to do to change that? But we so often rush into the judgment and condemnation when we notice something about ourselves instead of just being able to hold it in this sort of non-judgmental awareness.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Jane, how can people reach you? Where do they find your book?
Okay, I have two websites. One is janebyers.com, which is my name. You can see it there,
Yeah.
JANEBUYERS.com. And then the other website is 8septembers.com, which
Oh,
is the name of my book. So that's dedicated only to my book. JaneByers.com has everything. It's got my blog, it's got my book, it's got my consulting services. So either one is fine. And I'd love to
perfect.
hear from people.
Yeah. Well, we'll make sure that we'll have both of those in the show notes for people so that they
Okay.
can easily
Thank you.
find that for you. Um, what do you hope women will carry with them after reading 8 Septembers?
Hmm. Well, I hope one that they will see themselves. There are many of us that are in that sandwich generation of caring for our parents, caring for our children, and trying to hold down a job and a marriage. So, one, I hope they see themselves reflected. Two, I hope that they uh, feel a little bit more confident about their understanding of the world of finance.
Mm,
I workshop the book with a lot of creative types, many of whom told me, I hear a dial tone as soon as you say the words Wall Street. And so
yeah.
one of the professional reviewers of the book said, you don't need a knowledge of Wall Street to be able to read and appreciate this book.
Ah,
So I hope that they feel a little empowered by having just a little bit more understanding about how Wall Street works and how it connects to the economy and to them personally.
yeah.
And I hope that they, not just women, but all readers will see the humanity in the people that work in finance. A lot of times we like to demonize people in certain
Mhm.
industries. And so, but I like to say wherever there's humans, there's human behavior.
That's right. Yeah.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. That's right. Yeah. Well, let
Yeah.
me ask you one last question before we close. When you remove the impressive titles and achievements, what are you most proud of about the woman you've become?
Hmm. I'm most proud of the fact that I'm able to stand in my own power now.
Mm,
That I sort of know who I am at my core and my best, and I'm able to bring that into my relationships with my current husband, my kids, and really anybody that I interact with. So it was a lot of effort reclaiming my power, and I feel very glad that I was able to do that and
that-
grateful.
yeah, perfect. Well, Jane, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of the um, difficult moments that you had to go through, but also all the positives. You know, it's not a good thing, but you know, life is life. What are
Yeah,
you going to do?
no, I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thanks for making this space for women to come and talk about their stories. I think it's really
Oh,
important.
oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, everybody. So, as I said, we're going to have all of the information where you can reach out to Jane if you want to speak with her, or if you want to snoop around to see what she's all about, or you want to purchase her book, which I think you should. It sounds so interesting and very enlightening. So, you may want to do that as well. And Jane, again, thank you so much for doing this, and wish you all the best.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.